Well, hello. My name is Bruce Painter. I'm a graduate of Northwestern University, and along with, at the request of the Northwestern University Archives, I'm very happy to be part of this video interview we're putting together. The other folks that you're looking at are Roger Kurucz and Richard Seminaro, who is the husband of the late Barbara Kurucz. And I'll just indicate as an opener that Barbara and Roger were twirlers with the Northwestern University Marching Band, and we'll hear much more about that, but very unique in being a brother and sister team and very crucial to the development of bands at Northwestern, and I would say marching bands throughout the Big Ten Conference. So welcome, Roger and Richard. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Bruce.
I think the first thing our people would want to know is what years, Roger, what years you were here in school and what years your sister were here in school?
I was here from 1957, graduated in 61. My sister came in 2 years later, 59, graduated in 63.
And when you were here at Northwestern, you were in the marching band the entire time that you were here?
Yes, I was.
And I think probably the folks who are watching this would be very interested to know, you were from Cudahy, Wisconsin, as I recall, correct?
Yes, suburban Milwaukee, Cudahy, Wisconsin, which is just 90 miles up the road.
And people will be wondering how you happened and how your sister happened to get to Northwestern rather than perhaps stay up above the border or go to some other school. Could you tell us the process by which you first became acquainted with Northwestern and the Northwestern bands?
Well, I believe I got a letter from the drum major at that time, and he wanted to know if I wanted to come down to Northwestern and take a look. There were other schools that were interested in me. Some of them had made scholarship offers, and I was interested in coming to Northwestern and seeing what they had. So I was invited down one weekend, and I believe it was a Friday afternoon that I showed up. I traveled with the band to Madison. They went to Arlington Heights to perform at a high school football game, and then stayed with the Arlington Heights band people, and then went on to Madison the next day. Came back, we won the game 17-7.
By we, you're referring to Northwestern?
Yes.
We is always Northwestern with you, right?
Well, yeah, at that time I was a little equivocating because I was in Wisconsin.
And now?
Oh, for the last 50 years. The answer is, I'm sure you know what the answer is. So anyway, the next week I came down, and again they showed me around. Went ahead and performed between the third and fourth quarters of the football game against Purdue here at home. And afterwards was introduced to the band director, John Painter, your dad. And it was all done almost as if I was being recruited for a basketball or a football scholarship. And then there was some miscommunication where Northwestern thought I was in the Army, and I wasn't in the Army, although I was waiting for West Point tests to come back. So I wrote them and I said, you know, are you interested in me? And they said yes. We were trying to find you. And so that's what brought me here.
I probably should have started maybe more at the beginning as I think about it, but a lot of the people who'll be watching this interview will be wondering exactly back in the time when you were beginning as a young person involved in twirling, how common was that and how long had you been twirling when you finally got to the point where it was going to help, that activity was going to help pay for your college education?
Well, I started baton twirling when I was 4. My sister was 3. We started together. In fact, it was during the war, and they didn't have metal batons. They had wooden batons, which were not a good idea because the baton has to be properly balanced. But anyway, and we took lessons from high school twirlers, and we competed early on unsuccessfully, and then we found some qualified instructors that we were taught by, and then we, in effect, to a large extent, self-taught ourselves.
And when you say you competed, did you and your sister, did Barbara and you compete as a duet? So to speak?
Sometimes, and we also competed as individuals in our individual division. Like mine would be junior or senior boys, hers would be 13, 14-year-old girl division. So we did do that, and we were quite successful. Barbara won the, I think it was 1954 Junior Girls National Championship and 1957 Senior. There's only a handful of women who've done that. The boys had a little different situation. They could go back and repeat, so I had repeated as national champion 7 years in a row. That opportunity was not available to the girls.
Richard, we know that this is probably difficult for you. Barbara passed away a short time ago at the age of 70, but we wish she could be in the chair.
Right.
But if you would be so kind as to tell us what she told you about the circumstances that brought her to Northwestern, other than the fact, or maybe despite the fact, that her big brother was here in Evanston.
Well, I think the key was that she wanted to go. Well, first of all, she thought a great deal of the university, and also with Roger here. And she met your dad, and I think that was a draw. I found a letter from your dad to her when she had shown official interest, saying that since she's a girl, that he'll have to interview her and meet her family, which was one of his typical, I think, little jokes, because he obviously knew Roger and the family very well.
Well, we're going to sort of get to the point of Barbara's rather unique gender status within the band, but that comes a little bit later on. Roger, you arrive on campus, and you were the only twirler, correct? For those of us who might not know about that.
Yes, they had a drum major, and I was considered for the position of drum major, but actually I really didn't want to do that because the uniform of a drum major would restrict me in doing my competitive show twirling routines, and John said that he would like to try me as a twirler exclusively, and he thought that that may have not rested well with me, but that's what I was. I was the kicker, I didn't hold the ball.
And once you came to Northwestern, was there a period in which you were twirling with the band, but before you were featured as a twirler, or were you featured from the start?
When I took those two trips, or I took the trip to Wisconsin and was home for Purdue, I obviously twirled with not being a member of the band. I wasn't a member of the university at that time either, but a senior in high school. So, but no, as soon as I got down here, I think our first game at home was against Oregon State, and I was the featured Baton twirler. Then until I graduated in '61.
Like you, I was also a member of the marching band.
Yes, indeed.
And so my first experience on the first day of drill, it being my father who was running the drill, would be a little different than everyone else. And everybody has their own recollections of that first experience. What do you remember about your first experience in a band practice at Northwestern? And maybe you could tell them, since it's not done the same way, it's not done on the West Lot anymore, perhaps you could tell our friends who are watching what that was like for you.
Well, everybody had a script. In other words, if you were in file A, rank 6, your number was A6, and you'd pull your script, and in that script was the pregame and the halftime show, and each member in the marching band that had a assigned number based upon those coordinates knew exactly where to stand. The organization and the attention to detail was fantastic, and we practiced Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I believe, for 2 hours each, and the amount of work that we got done in that period of time, based upon the expertise of the band department and your father in particular, was astronomical, and I was forever impressed with how much was accomplished with such ease and organization.
As a twirler, and I'll probably ask Rich for your comments on this, your perspective on Barb's recollections, did you feel like you were part of the band, or were you, because of your kind of unusual status, not playing an instrument, were you separate from the band? Tell us how you felt about that.
No. The band was a functional unit. I may have been a little bit of a specialist type, again, going back to the football analogy. The field goal kicker is as much a part of the football team as some defensive tackle. And I wasn't a defensive tackle. So, but that doesn't mean I wasn't part of the unit. And we had a tremendous esprit de corps. And I think that stemmed from and emanated from the character and the drive of your dad.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And of course, when you were in the band, it was an all-male band.
Yes.
That lasted until Barbara Kurtz arrived on the scene.
Right.
And Richard, I know that Barbara undoubtedly had some thoughts about being the first, at least as far as history remembers it, the first female on the field with the band. Can you tell us any thoughts that she had regarding that experience?
Well, I think she always took pride in the fact that she was a kind of a barrier breaker, although she related the fact that she could not get a scholarship here because Roger's scholarship was an athletic scholarship. And your dad told her, unfortunately, they couldn't disguise her as a man. Therefore,
I remember, Barbara, you could not have.
She could not get an athletic scholarship. At that time, there was no Title IX. So she during her summer twirling camps and that, she raised enough money, and through her mom and dad paid for her own education down here, which was never an issue.
Is it your understanding that it was sort of her intention, if it could be done, that she would be coming to Northwestern too?
You know, I think so. And I guess we never really talked a lot about that, but I think it was kind of a given. She and Roger had twirled so close to one another over their years. I think it was kind of just another step in the progression that they had. And of course, with Northwestern being the kind of school it is, it's certainly not a step down to make a move like that.
Roger, I know that, I know from my own recollection, and it's a very vivid recollection of you and your sister twirling together. In my experience, I don't recall another brother-sister team twirling for the same school at the same time. Is it unique in that sense? I know it was unique at the time, right?
I think that it still maintains that uniqueness. I don't recall any Big Ten school that had a brother and sister baton twirler, certainly at the same time. And I think that's a distinction that's going to probably stand for quite a while.
Well, it says something about a great deal about the relationship you had within your family. There are people who we run into all the time who the objective of going to college is to get away from their family. And here not only do you, when you start school, your sister comes, but she becomes a daily part of your life.
Sure.
And did that ever cause any sorts of problems, or how do you regard it looking back?
She always would consult me on certain matters, and from the lofty vantage point of a sophomore in college, junior, I would try and advise her as best I could. But no, we were always a very close brother and sister.
Tell us, for those of us who aren't familiar with the whole aspect of twirling and entertaining a crowd, I mean, people see, they see marvelous things being done, probably not featured quite as much now as it was back in those days. I don't see as many featured twirlers, but give us some idea what type of preparation and planning goes into a typical, maybe a 90-second routine or a 2-minute routine?
Could be around 2 minutes.
Give us an idea how that works.
Well, in my case, what I did is I took it off of my competitive routine. And competition is one thing, football twirling is another. But I took it off of there basically and expanded my routine to fit the occasion of a featured performer at a major university. The preparation, I think, starts years before. And with the competition and the preparation and then the opportunity to perform in a major athletic setting, and with the scholarship that I had, I believe this athletic department paid my tuition and fees, and the band department paid my room and part of my board. It was a pretty good deal.
When I was in the marching band, they gave me a set of cymbals and I played them. and my dad never told me how to play the cymbals. I'm curious how much input he had with you or with Barbara regarding the types of routines you did, or the type, how he expected you to conduct yourself if you were a twirler with the band.
Well, he didn't try and tell me how to twirl. Somebody once asked me if he ever gave me any instructions, any advice. And I said yes, once. I was fairly well renowned for my aerials. We threw the baton up. And they've been measured grossly to be 90, maybe 95 feet. And anyway, after I completed my routine and he came off, he said, I have some advice for you. I said, well, what is that? He says, when you throw that up and it comes down, don't drop it.
He usually gave me more specific advice than that, but well, that's for a different interview. Richard, I would be interested to know if we touched briefly on the fact that Barbara was sort of a groundbreaker with the Northwestern Band. It was, in fact, at the time, if I remember right, it was referred to as the 160-piece all-male Northwestern University marching band when they would announce it. I'm guessing, and this is based a little bit on my knowledge of my dad, he probably had some words of advice to Barbara on how to handle a situation where it's now the 160-piece all-male plus one.
Plus one. No, I wasn't privy to those conversations, to be honest, but I know Barbara thought very highly of your dad, and I'm sure he had some words of wisdom for her. And I know on road trips, your mom went along as a chaperone, and Barbara told some interesting stories sometimes about barricades being put around her door by the band members. They'd get up in the morning, there'd be barricades from outside the street for some construction site around the door to protect the room.
Well, I can tell you, I remember, even though I was a kid, Barbara was a lady.
Yes.
So any improper thoughts would be coming from the band, not from her, I know that. Now, let's talk a little bit about actually being in the band and the experience of being a game day at what was then Dyke Stadium, now Ryan Field, and how that felt as you look back on your experience.
Well, I'd say it probably started with the Friday night or Friday afternoon practice. It was the last practice we were going to have before we'd put our uniforms on and be within striking distance of the field. The buses were sent out, and there were various areas that the band members could accumulate or congregate with a bus stop, pick them up and take them to the field. We would get there, we'd run through our drills, we'd run through our music, we'd run through our drills again, and then we'd have lunch, and then we'd have a talk through where Dr. Painter reminded everybody of what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And he always said that and I've never seen the University of Northwestern's band perform poorly in a deportment manner. And John was always known for saying we were going to be gentlemen because we're representing the university, and we're going to be gentlemen until we step onto the field.
And now why don't you tell us a little bit about what it was like to be on the field and doing it?
Well, first of all, you had all those people. I mean, we traveled a lot. We had good home crowds, and it was awe-inspiring. I can't see how anybody couldn't get up for a game. And so we entered from the north end zone. We did our diamond drills. I was allowed to come out to the 35-yard line to begin with. And when we started our downfield march, then I started twirling. Then we did our greeting to the visiting team in our own musical tribute. And usually the pregame ended with my solo, which was, as you said, maybe 90 seconds, 2 minutes. And it was always well received by the students and by the fans generally in the stands. So, and then we got ready for halftime.
We've had some, not lately, but there was a period of time that some of our friends will remember as being lean times in Northwestern football. What was the football program like during the years you were here?
Well, it was pretty good. It was coming back. I know when I was a junior, we were ranked second in the country. We eventually fell from that position and wound up with a 6-3 record. Back then they had 9 instead of 11 or 12 season games. And Era Parseghian was our coach, and he was the type of guy that when he came into a room, the magnetism of his character and drive raised the temperature of the room a degree or two. It's much like your father. Your father was the same type of dynamic, charismatic leader in a functional organization that Northwestern really has come to know and love over the years.
When you were in the band, what type of relationship, what was the sense you had of the relationship between team and band, band and student body and team?
I think there was a synergy there. One fed on the other. And again, that was part of the overall awe of being a member of the Northwestern University Marching Band. We had great support from the student body, good support from the faculty, and we, of course, were very proud to represent the university. We were pretty much athletes, actually. In fact, I don't know if you remember the name Eddie West.
Yes, I do.
He carried the Northwestern flag, the big flag, ahead of the flag corps. And he happened to be the Big Ten 600-yard indoor champion on our track team. And he was in the flag corps.
But fortunately, it was not a requirement that you be a star athlete to get into the marching band. You just had to like pick up your athletic seasoning to get in.
That's true.
When you were in the band, did you receive any kind of academic credit for being in the band?
Yes. I think there was a trade-off with PE, and the trade-off was quite equitable because they worked very hard in the band.
For sure.
And I didn't take any PE courses because I was always with the band. But I'm sure they worked hard in the physical education realm as well.
Now tell us what it was like. I mean, that first year you were the featured twirler, and now in the second year,
No, third year.
in the third year, you're to some extent sharing that particular part of the exposure with your sister. Did that require any adjustment on your part? Or?
Not at all. I've always shared with her and she shared with me. And we've always supported each other. And so it was just a continuation of business as usual.
Okay. And then after you'd completed your 4 years at Northwestern, right?
Yes.
Then that would have left Barbara with two additional
more,
years?
yes.
And Rich, if you could tell us, my recollection is she sort of stepped right in as the featured soloist.
Yes, in fact, Roger related the story to me where she went to your dad and said, "It's time for me to be on the field first, too." Right?
That's right.
And he said, "You're right."
Was there ever a time after you completed your 4 years at Northwestern where you came back and twirled again? Were you ever asked to twirl with your sister, sort of?
No, I don't think I was.
Okay.
I don't think I was.
Well, they did have another twirler that came in. Did Richard Burton come in the first year you were gone, or is another year?
I think he was the first year I was gone.
Okay, so there was another twirler
I don't
with
know
Barbara.
if he finished his 4 years, though.
I'm going to ask each of you now that, with the perspective of time, when you look back, how do you look back at your time at Northwestern, Roger? And I'll be asking you about what Barbara might have thought about that. But how do you look back at your time at Northwestern and the effect or influence it's had on your life?
It was one of the high points of my life. The idea of developing my art to the extent that I would qualify for an athletic scholarship is something that I always consider one of my better accomplishments. The memories, the victories, and the defeats were, how should you say, monumental. And without carrying the answer on to redundancy, I'll leave it at that.
Richard, did Barbara ever comment on her experience at Northwestern and the effect it had on either while she was here or as she went on in life?
Well, I think she always looked upon the experience here as similar to what Rogers was. It was a great place to be. She obviously could do something she enjoyed doing a lot, and was excelling at it. And she did well in school. And so I think the 4 years here for her were equally as good and as looked upon favorably as Rogers were.
After you graduated, you stayed in touch with your alma mater, correct?
Yes, I did.
And tell us some of the things that have brought you back to campus from time to time, or maybe to road games or experiences. For example, were you there for the Rose Bowl game in January of 1996?
Yes. In fact, I remember with my uncle listening to the Rose Bowl game of 1949.
Okay. Well, then you heard a win in that one.
I heard a win in that one, in spite of the fact that they made some conjecture that the touchdown was not scored because the fumble occurred before they went in.
Those are West Coast
fantasy.
alibis. We've rejected that now. History is spoken at this point. But and Barbara also tended to come back to campus when she had the opportunity, correct?
Yep. Yes, she did. She probably wouldn't get back as often. We were in Madison at the time, quite a bit of the time, and we were involved at the University of Wisconsin, which is where I went to both undergraduate and law school. So she became a Badger fan to a certain extent, but never when Northwestern was involved. We had some interesting game time discussions, let's put it that way.
I want to ask you a question about your parents, because my recollection when you were twirling, I would have been about 10 years old, but I felt like I was part of what was going on. I probably wasn't.
You were.
Oh, no. But I have a very clear recollection of your parents coming and attending the games, and if you could just talk a little bit about, I'd like you to talk about what they meant, the part they played in your coming down to Northwestern, and the support you had and Barbara had from them.
Well, they allowed us to make our own decision. I mean, my dad obviously would have liked to see us come to Northwestern, as we eventually did, but that was a decision he left open to us. And of course, once we got here, they were season ticket holders for the duration of our time, faithfully come down from Milwaukee for all the home games, and they attended several away games too. I mean, many a time we'd be marching through campus. I remember this was at Michigan State, and there, lo and behold, on the side of the road was my mom and dad waiting. They were very supportive, very encouraging, and I think they loved Northwestern almost as much as I do.
I know that's true. Thanks for sharing that. One of the things I wanted to mention to you, it happens that we are in the midst of the 100th anniversary of the song, Go You Northwestern. It was actually performed, I understand it, for the first time in 1912. My dad wasn't part of that one, but it was performed in November of 1912, at least that's what I'm told. And it's widely regarded, easily recognizable song. I'm just curious what thoughts go through your mind when you hear that song, especially now that we're about to perhaps have some recognition of it as a centennial year for that song.
Well, again, it just makes electricity move through my limbs and my body. It's an emotional song because of the very special place it has played in my life and my success as a baton twirler. And I just cannot think of anything more stirring than either Go You Northwestern or Push On, coming out of the drums and the horns and the woodwinds of the Northwestern Marching Band as it entertains its fans.
Richard, your thoughts on, or yours and Barbara's thoughts with regard to the school and the school songs?
Well, obviously Northwestern was her alma mater, and Go You Northwestern was very true to her. And being a Wisconsin, I will relate one story. We got to know Mike LaCrone, who's the band director at Madison, very well while we lived there. And Barbara had some conversations about his formative years, and he was very complimentary of your dad, because he really mirrored, the Wisconsin Marching Band mirrored the way the Northwestern Band at that time performed under your dad. And that was, I thought, very complimentary when we had discussions with him. But as far as the song was concerned, she always loved it, and we had a good time. And as I said, when the Northwestern played and Wisconsin wasn't playing, we were on the same wavelength.
Well, Roger, I think we're kind of at the end of what, at least the questions I had in mind. Is there anything you'd like to share with our folks about your experience with the band or your experience at Northwestern generally?
Well, my experience at Northwestern generally is I couldn't have made a more positive decision to come here. There was always people to help if you needed that. We're not a big school. We don't get lost in numbers. You actually get to speak with your professors. And the esteem that I've noticed for Northwestern around the country as my life has expanded and moved forward is almost unheard of. I may be walking down the street with one of my shirts on, and somebody says, "Oh, Northwestern, it's a good school." Nobody solicited that. And and the opportunity to meet quality people like your dad, like Stu Holcomb, the athletic director, who was responsible for my my scholarship. I can't think of a better place or a more positive place for me to spend those 4 years than where I did.
Well, I know that all generations of Northwestern fans and football people and just administrators are grateful that you and Barbara decided to come to Northwestern. So, and thank you for sharing so much of your recollections and remembrances with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.